So in my last Worldbox video, I tried to let the game play itself for 24 hours straight to mixed results, and while that was definitely interesting, I wanted to try something with a more definitive ending for this one. I've been running a new world for the last week on and off, and it's seen its fair share of craziness ranging from world wars, rebellions, tornadoes, and a few napalm strikes. Okay, lots of napalm strikes. There's currently a few superpowers with populations numbering well over 1,000, none of the original empires exist, and the global state of affairs has reached a sort of uneasy peace. While there are little conflicts here and there between neighboring states, it's been quite a while since we've seen any large-scale warfare, and needless to say, things have been getting a bit stale as it often does late game. At first, I was tempted to do what I always do and nuke it all out of existence and start fresh, but then I got an idea. I decided the perfect way to end the world would be to infect it with a zombie virus and see what happens. So sit back, leave a like if you enjoy, and hit the mystery box because we're now entering round 1 of the Worldbox zombie apocalypse. Loading up the world my game aptly named Archipelagos in Death, I needed to pick a place to start the outbreak. Initially, I planned to start things in the small human village of Beto. It was on the edge of civilization, nestled cozily between some mountains and a taiga forest. At first, this seemed to be perfect due to how isolated it was. I wanted a slow start to the zombie outbreak to give the rest of the world a chance to respond, but I quickly realized that the village of Beto wasn't nearly as isolated as I thought. It turns out the fauna from a candy biome to the northeast had decided to pay Beto a visit and cause some trouble. They were being attacked by some disturbingly carnivorous gingerbread men, and whatever this thing is. With Beto already under siege by candy monsters, I didn't really feel right unleashing a zombie plague on a town that was already down on its luck, so I went a bit further north to the elven settlement called Rona, which aside from the somewhat ironic name, also had a larger population than Beto, making it a better candidate for our zombie outbreak. Looking down on the town's occupants, I chose one standing in the center of the square to become Patient Zero, and it was then only a matter of time before she turned. Upon becoming undead and developing a craving for elven flesh, Patient Zero was actually killed rather quickly by the town guards, who equipped themselves with bows and kept their distance, thus not getting infected themselves. It seemed things were going to be over before they started, but that's when I realized it was already too late, as I saw there was another infected on the other side of town, though this time the guards weren't nearly quick enough. As the number of infected rose, guards were forced to turn their weapons on their former neighbors, friends, and lovers. But despite their desperate measures, it was already too late, as somewhere in the town began to catch fire, adding to the mounting chaos. Among the populace, panic began to set in, and startled onlookers began to flock to the streets to see what was going on, only adding more fuel to the fire that was the zombie outbreak. In a matter of mere minutes, the elven town of Rona was desolate, and hordes of zombies wandered the streets. While the sparsely populated southern forests were quickly taken over, there simply wasn't enough life to support the virus, so the outbreak remained somewhat limited there. The north, however, was a completely different story. As the wave of zombies took over the southern farm, the town's militia came to face this new threat, unwitting of the true danger they posed. During the battle for the farm, there was an explosion that somehow sent a lone zombie over the western mountain that divided elven lands from the rest of the world. The zombie landed in the human village of Luersk on the other side of the water. Miraculously somehow, the humans were able to kill not only the initial zombie, but any infected as a result of the walking corpse's arrival, thus rendering their lands uncorrupted for the time being. Back towards the east, the elves were doing shockingly well, holding the line, and not only did they manage to push the undead back, but they came close to retaking the fallen city of Rona, though got too carried away as some in their ranks were foolish and prideful as they charged in to engage the zombies in hand-to-hand combat. This, suffice to say, did not go over well for them, and nearly all the elves that made physical contact with the zombies would turn, causing the elves to lose the city of Rona for the final time. With the fall of Rona, it seemed the elves had learned to adjust their tactics, and began to use almost exclusively ranged weapons to combat the undead menace, but unfortunately, some among their force still chose to charge in and fight, which resulted in more infected. The lack of discipline and organization was becoming more of a problem for the elves. Beto hadn't been heard from since the outbreak, and the other southern settlement was cut off, with zombies occupying the space between it and the rest of the elven kingdom. Once again, warriors from the north were sent south in an attempt to curb the zombie threat. Far to the north in the elven capital of Sohel, tales of the zombie virus started making their way into the ears of the elven government, who chose to ignore the threat and continue waging war against the dwarven island kingdom. Throughout the rest of the world, life continued on as usual, with the human kingdom, Oafat of Sun, entering a massive war with their neighbor, the UI Imperium. Many would perish in house-to-house combat, while in the north, the elves razed an ancient city for reasons lost to time. Oddly, it was actually the humans who stopped the outbreak earlier who recognized the severity of the situation, and they somehow were able to land a large expeditionary force around the ruins of Beto, where they would then go on to establish their own town called Ishwa. While the elven troops engaged the zombies in the north, the humans waged war on two fronts, fighting the UI Imperium on the mainland, while also using their newly established colony of Ishwa to wage an offensive war against the zombies in the south. This new elven-human alliance was able to wipe out all of the zombies in the world somehow. I've never seen this happen in Worldbox. Normally, there are always a few left that ultimately end up infecting everyone and destroying entire species, but somehow this time around, the humans actually knew what they were doing and their counteroffensive worked. On the other side of the world, on the mainland, old tensions had flared up. The nations that came out of the end of the last World War began to fight once again. Now what if the zombie had made it over the mountains into human territory was never killed? What if it had infected more people and things got out of hand? We're going to use our god powers to find out. Zooming out and looking at the world, it appears the Elven Kingdom is split into two, while the Dwarven Island has been greatly reduced in population due to its war with the Elves. The once great and powerful UI Imperium now only has around half the population of the Oefat of Sun, its biggest rival. So I figured it was time to test the Oefats again. I would try this time by starting a massive zombie invasion from the sea on the Imperium coast. Let's see how they fare this time around. Untested and unproven, when the zombies made it to the Imperium shore, their response was massively less organized than that of the Oefats. Not only did I spawn an absolutely giant horde of naval zombies, but it also seemed that the peaceful and wealthy waterside village of Akiwes was woefully unprepared for any kind of conflict, never mind a zombie invasion. Unlike the swift military response we saw from the Oefats, the Imperium beachgoers were in a complete state of panic. Some fled, while others tried to fight the zombies with their hands. A few were smart enough to grab bows and arrows, but it wasn't enough. To make matters worse, in the midst of all this chaos, the king of the Imperium abandoned his people, leaving them without a leader during the start of the crisis. The zombies completely engulfed the coastal town before spreading north in massive numbers, quickly taking over the nearby city of Dotaro. A few guards heroically tried to fire arrows at the approaching hordes from a nearby farm, but there were simply too many undead for them to stop. Despite the chaos on the coast, the rest of the world was relatively peaceful. The site of the original outbreak was calm, with not a trace anything had ever happened, and the rest of the world remained blissfully unaware that the zombie plague, once avoided, was soon to return and decimate the entire world. Soon, news of the coastal outbreak would spread to the rest of the Imperium, and the newly appointed king would make the decision to use the last of their napalm supplies from the war on their own land in an attempt to halt the zombies' advance. He knew it wouldn't stop the zombies altogether, but he had to buy time for his people, time for a cure to be discovered. Despite the king's best efforts, the napalm only seemed to anger the zombies and further their advance, and now flaming mounds of rotten flesh began limping their way deeper into Imperium territory, sandwiching them between the undead and their sworn enemies. With little options remaining, the king of the Imperium authorized the use of artillery, meaning anyone stuck behind the zombie lines would perish. As the bombs dropped, so did the zombies' population, and at first it seemed the king's explosive solution would be at least a partial success. But just then, as the Age of Ice began, the Oefats of Sun invaded the Imperium's last stronghold city of Toyark. Large numbers of Oefat soldiers swarmed the streets, and the Imperium troops, weak and weary from the zombie outbreak, were unable to hold them back. In a matter of minutes, Toyark was taken. Toward the end of the invasion, zombies made their way through the snow and began to fight with the Oefats. Once again, the Oefats pushed back the zombies, and Toyark was free from the undead. They chased the Brain Eaters into the snowy forest and continued to press their counteroffensive to great success. Further to the south, however, was a different story. Large, wandering hordes of zombies had made their homes in the former Imperium cities before they began to wander eastward toward the Oefat of Suns. The border town's militias wisely drew the zombies away from the people and out into the open fields and attempted to surround them. However, the humans just didn't have the numbers and were in the process of being overrun. At the same time, more zombies wandered in from the south, and the nearly successful counterattack near Toyark was also being overrun. The Oefats of Sun fell back and ceded much of the former Imperium territories to the undead. Things were slow for a while, with neither the zombies nor the humans making much in the way of progress. I was about to call it quits and wrap things up and declare the human-zombie war a stalemate, when something weird happened. About half of the Oefats' territory declared independence from the main empire and became a separate kingdom calling itself the Ito Hegemony. Immediately, the Oefat declared war on its rebellious territory and sent an army to bring them back. The zombie threat had become secondary to reunifying the empire. As the two factions warred heavily, zombies continued to mill around, occasionally attacking cities on the outskirts of civilization. Eventually, the Ito hegemony was pushed back to the coastal city of Uchifoi. While the Oifots fought zombies on their borders, the hegemony was given a very brief period of respite before they were forced to make their last stand backed against the ocean. As the Oifot armies moved across the land, they killed any zombies they came across, clearing all but the westernmost coastal towns of undead. Eventually, they took over the Ito hegemony's last city by forcing them into a surrender. As time trudged on, the zombies worked their way east and terrorized the western cities of humans, though large amounts of troops were sent wherever the undead hordes arrived, and as such, were able to suppress them quickly, keeping the kingdom's borders mostly intact. The northwestern city of Chua suffered the most when the largest zombie horde yet worked its way through it and the neighboring towns. As the Age of Ice came to a close and the Age of Sun dawned, the Oifot expanded westward in a risky move to recapture territory that belonged to them before the World Wars. As they did, however, the zombies were able to infiltrate their lines and further enter their cities. With ground quickly being lost and the front changing in favor of the undead, the difficult decision was made to deploy nuclear weapons in areas designated burn zones. Once proud cities like Fiansk were declared unsalvageable and nuked out of existence with napalm strikes to follow. Between the fire and nuclear strikes, the zombie army was curbed considerably, but not without great loss and destruction to the Oifot civilization. Nearly half of the main continent became a wasteland, and still not all of the zombies were killed. With the nuking of its own cities and the unprecedented levels of mass destruction that went with it, the Oifot of Sun Kingdom entered into the Age of Tears. But not all was lost. The human spirit persisted. Despite all the doom and gloom, explorers had expanded to the now zombie-free West Coast, and started new settlements, the first of them ironically being in the very coastal region the apocalypse started. Their populations grew quickly, and their people prospered. With the zombie hordes fractured and distraught, Oifot soldiers hunted down the last of them, and things finally started looking up. Except for the elves in the east that had been killing each other this whole time, ignoring the zombie apocalypse. This is actually my first world to get the good ending, so to say, where all the empires just stopped fighting each other, and the major endgame crisis didn't wipe out most or all of the map. We also get a nice bit of diversity in terms of species still being alive, where the world didn't end up with one controlling the entire map like was the case with my first Worldbox video. I have to say, this is not how I thought this one was going to play out at all. First off, the fact that the elves are even alive in the first place is a huge miracle, because every Worldbox game I've played thus far, the elves die pretty quickly. But not only that, despite all the civil wars they fought, they're actually doing pretty well for themselves, all things considered. I also thought that the big islands of the northwest with the dwarves were originally on, I thought that was going to play a much bigger role with maybe the humans going there to try to survive the zombie outbreak, but it never came to that. So that was pretty cool and kind of surprising, in a good way. But that being said, this is going to be the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, leave a like on it, it helps out the channel a lot. This went on a bit longer than I wanted it to, but it still evolved into an interesting story in the end, and that being said, if you haven't already, I highly recommend Worldbox. This game is amazing and surprises me every time I play it. Also go and check out my other Worldbox videos and subscribe if you like what I do. As always, thank you so much for watching, have a great day, and actually by the time this gets uploaded, it'll basically be Christmas, so have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year or whatever you do, and last but not least, as always, stay safe. Goodbye, guys. How do you say that?
Ohiafort.
No, try again.
Oifort.
Not Oe Fort, Oe Fought.
Oifort.
Not Oe Thought, Oe Fought.
Ohiafort.